I got into a really bad like street fight. I ended up getting cut. It's like a 20-year-old scar from a blade. Wow. If you wrestle at a high level, you'll almost develop like an eating disorder. I'm not being funny, right? This is why MMA is dominating all these other sports, because they've lost their way. We are getting shitty fights. There's guys who fight 20, 30 times who never make a million. You can't make it to 30-0 and be known in the UFC without being a millionaire. Tyron Woodley fought Jake Paul and made more money than an undefeated Olympic athlete has ever made. So you want to make money in boxing, get to the UFC first, because you'll get paid way more by the time you do that first boxing match. For Floyd to make that 100 million, it was piled on a bunch of dead bodies. You know how many Muhammad Ali's there are who didn't get to be a legend?
Alright guys, welcome back to the Oak Villains. Today we have special guest over here, Tyson the Beast. This is the man who has done it all. He wanted to wrestle, he did wrestling, boxing, and now in MMA. He fought, he's undefeated, and now he's a coach and business owner. Welcome Tyson, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'll keep it short. President of the Thiccboy Fight Club, Andrew Tyson. Amateur fighter when I was in Kansas City, 11-0 as an amateur, 6-0 as a pro. Started off my career as a wrestler, took some years off and had a little incident, gained a little weight during an injury. And through boxing, I ended up getting into MMA because I knew the MMA coach at the gym. And my whole life, I just kind of been obsessed with martial arts. Like I was literally that kid that was obsessed with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, combat movies. Never really knew that that would be the path it would end up taking me. But now that I'm older and I'm now coaching guys like you, super talented guys like you, I kind of realized that this was always just pulling me in some way, right? Like even though I went to university, tried to do other things. So now with Thiccboy, we're doing fight promotions. I'm coaching guys, managing guys. This guy's one of the biggest studs we have on the team. I know he's very humble about it, but
thank you.
November 9th, you'll get to see you'll get to see what this kid's made of.
Thank you very much. As you said, you started with wrestling, right? Yeah. So what made you change from wrestling to boxing to MMA? Like, tell us a little bit about your transition.
So I was born here in Toronto, and I consider myself a basketball player, right? So I was a pretty good athlete regardless, right? When I got to Kansas, like the difference between Canadian athletes and American athletes is just, it's not the same, right? So it was a very humbling experience, right? But basically what happened was when I wasn't able to make the basketball team there, I had a very smart wrestling coach named Joel Rios. Shout out to him. And he was very good at when guys who he saw were good athletes who either didn't make the basketball team or were former football players, he would always try to recruit them, and I was one of them. And I just took to it right away, right? Like, because as much as I loved playing basketball, these other thing, I was a very scrappy kid. I grew up getting into fights. It was like I'm like, how most people would be like, oh, my first fight was Michael whoever in 5th grade I actually don't remember my first fight. Like I just remember, and that's funny to say now, like I have a kid and all these things, but like literally I can't pin down the first time I got into an actual fight. It's just like I've always been getting in trouble. It's always, you know what I mean? And so I took to it very quickly, right? And then I started playing football. I never really played organized sports up until I got into Kansas, right? And so the level of athleticism was just different. But ended up being an all-state wrestler in Kansas, which, like I said, if you look up the history of Kansas wrestling, it's very high level. And so, funny story, I was supposed to go wrestle in university. I went to a camp earlier, but my goal before I had hurt my knee was to go to Mizzou. So now it's kind of funny, like I said, this is a weird thing. Tyron Woodley went to University of Missouri.
Oh, wow.
Michael Chandler went to the University of Missouri. Ben Askren went to the University of Missouri. Now, when I wanted to go wrestle there, this is before any of these guys were big deals, right? We all everyone knows these guys because of their wrestling career. I grew up with wrestling with the McCormick brothers. That's for like people who really know wrestling. And I remember going on spring break, going to summer, doing the camp, and like literally, I'll just be honest, right? I always kind of blamed the knee thing, but what basically happened was I didn't know that I'd one day be a fighter, and I just decided I'd rather just have fun and party in college than wrestle. So I decided not to wrestle. As funny as that sounds now, right?
Did you get to wrestle Tyron Woodley or Chandler?
No. So I've trained in the same room as Woodley because he's an American top team guy. He's from Missouri. Chandler, I met, like I was there when Chandler, if you look at Michael Chandler's first 2 pro fights, it was against 2 of my teammates. So okay. Richard Bojanovic, and he fought a guy named Chris Page, who was also from Kansas City. Like where I'm from is a hub, right? Ben Askren, when he won his first Bellator tournament, it was in Kansas City. We were all there.
Shit.
Like, I mean, like we all kind of know each other, right? It's like that wrestling community is very, now, like I said, at the time, UFC was already a thing, but it wasn't like what it is now, right? Mm-hmm. It was just kind of like I never really knew that this is where it was going to go fully, but now it's kind of like, oh, this must have been meant to be, right? Mm-hmm. And now if you look around from Kansas City, where Gloria made James Krause, shout out to the legend, all the nonsense aside, we were breeding something, one of the best teams in the world, right? And so I just kind of ended up in an environment where it was like, this was meant to be. And so, at the time it wasn't known as a UFC hub. Kansas City wasn't. And now fast forward, it's like a legendary scene, right? The place I did my pro debut, 4 of their featherweights in a row, all guys I know and train with, when they became champion in this promotion, made it to the UFC.
Oh, wow.
So imagine if Thiccboy, right? Imagine if 4 of our 155ers or 170 pounders all make it to the UFC.
That's
like,
crazy.
So it's just kind of weird how it all came together. Now that I'm back here in Toronto, man, like, we're really doing something special. And I'm very confident in what I'm teaching you guys. You're a perfect example of a guy who came from a boxing background. You put trust in me. I'm obviously going to be biased, but it's the response I get from other guys in the MMA community that let me know I'm doing the right thing with guys like you and all the guys we have at Ballard. So it's just kind of something that I feel like has always been pulling me around. I was able to take something that was probably considered negative for my mom her entire life. I'm always getting to fight. I'm talking about all the time, right? Always an issue. To where now, like, it's really something special. And, while I'm older, I know I'm young in this game because you talk about being a promoter, man. Dana White is going to be around for a long time. Bob Arum's like 90. And, I really know, just like when I started my fight career, I'm very young in this promotional game. And I think I got lucky the way the injuries kind of slowed my career down and forced me to focus on this before. So, yeah, it's just one of those weird things that now that I'm back in Toronto, I think I really appreciate all those things from the past,
You know why I'm really interested in your story, because I don't have anywhere close to your story, but like, it's somewhat resonating. Like, you started one sport and then the second and the third, and then now it's MMA. And same way, like, I was doing boxing, and then I'm like, oh, okay, let me try wrestling one day, I think, or jiu-jitsu or whatnot. And then slowly, I'm like, oh, fuck, let me fight. So now MMA. So tell, like, how, like, you already had in your mind that, okay, I'm going to be an MMA fighter, or you just took boxing just for the sake of boxing?
So yeah, basically what happened, I can be honest about this, right? So after I'd done wrestling, I got really big into lifting. I'm in college, I'm enjoying life, right? But it was always kind of there, right? And I remember having a lot of regrets about not wrestling in college, even though it had nothing to do with the MMA thing either. It's like, let's say years later, I'm watching all these guys make it to the UFC and do all this stuff. That's easy to have regret. But this was even before Tyrone Woodley was I had already regretted not deciding to go to wrestling college, right? If that makes sense. And I remember, like, I tried a jiu-jitsu class. Like, that competitive thing was
nature
still in me, right?
stays in there.
Still in me, right? And so basically what happened was, I had gotten big, and I got into a really bad, like, street fight, right? Like, I ended up getting, like, cut. I don't want to get too much into the details of it, but I still have the scar from it. It's like a 20-year-old scar from a blade. Wow. This hand that's kind of busted like this didn't happen when I was fighting. This happened from that injury. This is always, I was in a cast for like 10 weeks, and I basically got like fat, right? And so I
can't imagine you getting fat, bro.
So this is what's funny, right? This is why this thick boy thing resonates across the board, right? Anybody who wrestled can attest to this, right? If you wrestle at a high level, especially if you're known for cutting weight, you almost develop like an eating disorder. I'm not being funny, right? Like,
that's true. You're telling me.
It is, right? This is why no matter who it is, anybody who wrestles, it was just like we're all the same people. And like, like, everybody gets the joke. Everybody gets the joke. And so what happens when you're used to burning calories, a lot, training a certain way? Because I was still, like, one thing I got really into was like lifting, right? Jiu-jitsu and all these things weren't as popular. It wasn't like now where I almost have to sit down and really choose my jiu-jitsu gym. It was like there was like one jiu-jitsu gym, right?
Oh, wow.
But this competitiveness was always in me. So basically what happened when I got the injury, I kept eating like a thick boy minus the training. And like this, like when I started this thick boy thing, I had people that like from high school wrestling who were contacting me. This was years ago when I started. They were like laughing like, oh, this has always been you. Like, you've always been that guy cutting too much weight, eating a bunch, hiding from coach about your weight. Like, the way I am on.
So that's why.
Oh, yeah. Brother.
You know, even a single pound I lie.
The reason I'm on a lot of you guys is because, like, I know what's going on. I know when you tell me a weight, it's a lie. I know, like, everyone has this, like, one weight you just tell your coach that's like, you may not have checked your weight in like a week, but you just, I'm 189. That's you, right? You, like, probably not, though, right? And so when I started, it was like a funny thing. And so I had this injury, and I got into boxing to lose weight because once I remember taking the cast off, because it's not the same when you have a coach and you have a reason to train, right? It's hard to stay disciplined when you don't have an actual goal. And so lifting's fun, lifting's easy. The cardio was the problem. So, you know, as you get older, as we know, you know, things affect you differently. And that's the longest I've been in a situation where I couldn't.
How long were you out of gym?
I was in the cast for like 10 weeks. And then, because I decided not to do surgery. And then even once I got out of the cast, I do all this rehab. So like, I'm still eating the same way, but minus all the training, because I was gotten big into lifting. And I just noticed that one thing that just I hated doing was cardio. I hated, and I was known as a guy because all the weight cutting, I was big into running. But once you don't really have a reason to, it's hard. And so what happened was I joined a boxing gym because I knew a friend who's like girls started. It was a Title Boxing Club, right? Which anybody from Kansas City, Title Boxing is like a big brand. You guys use it up here, ringside. Most
okay, that is actually a gym.
I started my career at Title Boxing Club.
Wow.
Right. This is actually, and so I went to the first one to lose weight, and I fell in love with boxing. Right. Like that's why when a lot of times when with my job now, my business, like once again, like. I'm not selling something like a used car. Like I personally know for myself how much fun boxing was. How it was the one thing that I helped me like want to do cardio. And I'm a former athlete and competitive guy who then eventually became a fighter. What's the average guy who's sitting in front of a desk all the time the last 10 years who isn't athletic? Like how hard is it for him to enjoy doing it if I hated doing it, right? And boxing was something that like I would see people of all levels. And so it was just something I did fun. So I initially wanted to box, right? And shout out to my boxing coach, Melvin Wesley, legend in Kansas City. And so that was my plan. And then, like I said, the guy who ended up coming for the MMA program, because Title Boxing was a boxing gym, they added MMA. They were ahead of the game. Title Boxing is a boxing gym, and they saw the future of MMA coming. They got into it early.
See, that's where it comes, like keeping an open mind and adopting the culture.
Title MMA is a whole thing. Like, so now if you look up Title Boxing Club, you can find them all over the world. Like at one point they broke a franchise where they sold like 200 franchises.
Wow.
Legit, right? So, you know, this all my career started because of a couple guys who, like I said, they were always a little bit ahead, right? So a lot of times when I have some of these conversations with people, it reminds me of the old school Kansas City. It was like, oh, you don't get it yet. Like you're gonna get it eventually. And this is basically what happened with Title Boxing. They were smart enough to get into the branding. Now we know how popular boxing is for females. Everlast, one of the most respected brands,
right?
has a whole deal with Walmart where you can go get some, and anybody who's bought Walmart Everlast gloves, they know it's not the same as what Canelo's using. Why? Because companies, and I mostly because of Title, they kind of saw the future of, oh, it's going to be branding, it's going to be fitness. So when I was there, they brought in MMA. And this is before MMA was still like, it's like 2008, right? And the guy who they brought in, recognized me from wrestling. I was like a real well-known guy in the area. And basically he's kind of like, yo, what happened? Like, you're like fat. I'm like, oh, I tell him the whole story. He's like, oh, well, I'm starting that MMA. You should come train with some of the guys. You're already a wrestler. It's an advantage. So obviously the first day I do MMA, it's like I took to it right away. And based off my age, I was like 24 at the time or so.
So you started MMA career when you were 24?
Yeah, if you even count it as a career, because like I was more just started training.
Okay.
But I took to it right away because it was already an advantage. It made sense. And I already was smart enough to understand the politics of boxing, which is you start boxing at 24, even if you're a killer, like it is a lot harder to make it to that highest level. Whereas MMA, man, one thing people can criticize Dana White, UFC, all you want. If you are a good fighter, they'll find you. You can be from the hills of Dagestan. You can be from the Amazon of Brazil. You can be Mike Malott from, like, it does not matter. If you can fight, you'll get there. So it was just an easy take for me, right? I started doing it, and then because I'd started in a boxing gym, I right away was getting up so much game for boxing. Because boxing is still the highest level in terms of intelligence, in terms of fighting, right?
I'm going to get back to that one. Like, I really want to know about, like, if you have to pick one sport, boxing, wrestling, or jiu-jitsu, or Muay Thai, or kickboxing, what is going to be the one?
I will say this. The way I believe jiu-jitsu should be taught, the way I teach it, the way I try to absorb it, I would pick jiu-jitsu, because there was a time where jiu-jitsu guys weren't, just sitting on their butt diving for your legs. These guys were fighters. Like, the UFC was started by fighters. These guys were beating each other up bare knuckle. Like, Vale Tudo is basically a bare knuckle fight. And this is in the favelas of Brazil, so you can imagine how violent they got. That school of jiu-jitsu, the stuff I believe in, I would pick jiu-jitsu because it embodies wrestling.
Wow. I never expected that.
And I'm not naming any names, but some of you professors, I'm personally not going to put my son into some, because it's become too much like a sport. It's becoming karate. Oh, and that's my personal opinion, right? And we see it being replicated in UFC where, you have wrestlers beating up jiu-jitsu guys, these sambo guys. And, Michael always say, well, you have to train jiu-jitsu. Yes, you do. But I just think there's two separate schools happening right now. We are in the middle of that split. I'm the old school one where I don't think you're a black belt if you don't know how to do a double leg. I don't think you're legit if you're only way to attack somebody.
Oh, I love
sitting
that
on your
saying.
butt. I just don't, and that's gonna rub a lot of people the wrong way. But you know, like I said, my thing has always been nobody starts any of these sports to sit there and say I can't fight.
Wow.
So it drives me nuts when people are like, oh, you know, everything's about a fight with you. It's like, no, I'm not saying you have to do MMA, but nobody started or got into these martial arts to be like, well, I can't fight, right? It's the people who, you know, obviously there's more money in selling it to the casual person, all that, but it still should be insulated by the fact that this used to be a fight. Like, you don't think back in the day, like, karate was more dangerous than what it is now? And I make the joke all the time, right? Like, I'm a brown belt under the 10th planet system. It takes a lot to become a black belt in that system, but I don't ever want to be a black belt. And then because we water the sport down so much, some like 10-year-old girl comes up to me like, I'm a black belt too. Like, that's why I feel like these old school karate guys, like, yeah, we may laugh at them, but I bet there's a lot of truth to what their point is, which is back in my day. I believe that. I believe back in the day, before internet, before a lot of popularity, old school karate gyms were fucking blood sport. I believe that. Like, you look at all these old videos of like when MMA got popular, like this guy fights this guy. Like, I believe there was a time where if you were actually a karate black belt, you were a killer.
Wow.
Doesn't apply anymore. My concern is that's kind of what is happening with jiu-jitsu, where it doesn't mean it the same, right?
So what is your version of jiu-jitsu? Because like 3 months or 4 months ago, before my last fight got cancelled, or even my first fight, the guy was supposed to be, I think, blue belt over here at Thiccboy, and fight got cancelled. And my game was like, I'm not gonna stay boxing. I'm gonna take him down because that's his whole game plan, to take me down. Because I was not confident enough to stay up. I thought like maybe he's a jiu-jitsu guy. He knows his way to take me down. But now, after these 2-3 fights, my mindset has completely changed.
They're not
Am
the
I gonna?
same.
I'm thinking like, why don't you give me a jiu-jitsu guy and come like for the MMA fight with me?
This is the thing.
I'm
You
so
would-
confident that he's not gonna be
You
able to
would
catch me.
smoke I'm not going to name names, but here in Toronto, there are guys who are black belts who came to MMA and got beat up by guys they shouldn't have got beaten up by, and I use them as an example. There was a time where if you were the better jiu-jitsu guy, wrestling was just part of it. But if you're going in there against some Muay Thai guy and you can't get the takedown, to me, you're not a black belt. I know that sounds crazy, personal opinion. This is based off of who it is, right? I do not believe that if you are a legit jiu-jitsu black belt, anybody outside of another jiu-jitsu guy or wrestler should stop you from getting the takedown. And what we've done, we've separated it. Where now a lot of black belts have learned everything from sitting on their butt, which is fine, right? It's the sport. But I always remind them, we're not doing Japanese jiu-jitsu for a reason. We're not doing judo. The reason we are all doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu because we watch these guys beat everybody up in a cage. People forget jiu-jitsu around since like the 50s. Nobody gave a fuck, right? We were all doing, when I was younger, I wanted to do karate. I wanted to do taekwondo. I wanted to be Jean-Claude Van Damme. We all thought that, right? When did anybody start talking about wanting to put a gi on and do jiu-jitsu? It wasn't any time before the UFC. So now we have this generation now where obviously not everyone should want to get into a cage to fight. And jiu-jitsu is bigger than ever. I mean, can you name a sport that has more gyms opening up than jiu-jitsu gyms? Boxing gyms is all the legends. Like here in Toronto, other than fitness boxing gyms, right? But how many legit fight gyms are opening up in Toronto on a regular basis? Jiu-jitsu, it's like every month, every year, there's a new jiu-jitsu gym, a new guy. You've been at Battle Arts not that long. Look how many black belts, like it is bigger than ever. And I think a lot of times these guys are not giving credit to why that is, which is nobody cared about your art until certain people got in a cage and fought. Yes, now you don't have to be a fighter to be legit. We have all this, but we're watering down the sport because this is the problem. If you have a big gym and you have all these people, right, and you're killing it, there's always going to be 1 or 2 guys that want to fight. It's just part of martial arts. If you're a legit gym, you're not getting away from it. And what you'll notice is a lot of guys who aren't that legit are trying to veer their athletes away from MMA, which I get it, right? Like, it's a dangerous sport, but there's a reason. A lot of them know that what they're teaching isn't a martial art anymore. And my argument is, are we doing a sport or are we doing a martial art? And I think we're kind of veering into that direction, right? UFC came after Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Why is UFC bigger? Does winning a Jiu-Jitsu tournament make you bigger than a UFC fighter?
I don't think so.
Exactly. If you go to the Brazil, who gets
Unless
more
like
respect?
there is like, all I know is one guy from the Jiu-Jitsu, Gordon Ryan, because he is
He's a
training
legend,
with,
and he's running his mouth and
he's training with John Jones. Because of that, I know. It's like no disrespect to anybody. I love, because Jiu-Jitsu I like, because last my fight I finished with the Jiu-Jitsu.
it's still valuable. It's
Like,
still
I
one of the
love
most important
Jiu-Jitsu.
things. And I'm happy you said that because you're an outsider saying that, right? I always bring this up. The guys from the most legit camps that never fought MMA all come from MMA camps. Gordon Ryan came from a gym that produced George St. Pierre. Renzo Gracie, the head of there, fought his last fight when he was 53. 53 years old. The guy who owns ONE FC, that guy, his black belt is Renzo Gracie. Renzo Gracie just gave that.
Wow, that's crazy.
This guy,
so that guy's a fighter
GSP,
himself?
Yeah, the lineage comes from it, right? Like, then you look at these Cade Ruotula, which they're already doing MMA, so they've helped prove my argument anyway. But their professor, Galvoa, the guy who had all this beef with Gordon Ryan, he's one of the guys that helped make Gordon Ryan very famous. He used to fight MMA. Tyron Woodley beat him up, and he went back to jiu-jitsu. And yet, he himself is always kind of, you can tell, regretted that his MMA career. I always make this argument. The Brazilians agree with me. They know that at the end of the day, what makes you legit at the highest level is producing fighters. There was a time where you couldn't have a jiu-jitsu gym that was successful without having fighters. Now that's changed. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's good that we have young kids, but like, it's becoming more of a sport than a martial art, right? So the way I teach jiu-jitsu, which is heavily grappling, getting on top, not pulling guard unless I have to, I would take jiu-jitsu.
Get back up.
Yeah, but if we're just talking about pure, it's somewhere between the boxer or the wrestler. I can be a great wrestler, and maybe I've been in a few street fights, like maybe a guy like me, and I know I can hit hard. A lot of boxers don't respect the fact that there's guys who can knock your head off even without being boxers, especially if they suplex you on your head first. Same thing goes for that wrestler. Not all boxers don't know how to scrap a little bit in that clinch. Not all of them are you know what I mean, pushover. Some of them have played full, you know what I mean? So, but it's somewhere between those two arts.
So, me personally, and I haven't even taken so many wrestling classes, to be honest. Just a few. Now my boxing, first of all, my confidence has gone through the roof. Second is like I'm getting less tired despite me not doing anything special that I was doing for the conditioning. Because even yesterday when I spar, I was sparring with super heavyweight guys. These guys are 220, 230, 240. So when I clinch them, they're not going nowhere. So all I'm doing, I'll put a little clip on there. I'm not gonna put like I just don't wanna. But when I clinch, those guys are not doing anything.
They don't know what they're doing.
No.
And so it's two different energy
And
systems.
I'm like a little baby. I'm like a little guy next to them. Those guys are like this tall. I'm just tagging them. I hold.
Well,
And at the end of the round, they're like out of their breath.
So let me example. I can take a really high level conditioned boxer, and you can attest to this. First day on the boxing or the wrestling and jiu-jitsu mat, they're dying. Not because they're out of shape, it's a different energy system. I can go get you a national champion wrestler, bring them to that boxing ring or the bag, and they're dying. Two different energy systems. When you train both energy systems, I believe it just makes me better on the mat because I have a sprint to me that, you know what I mean? Same thing with jiu-jitsu and wrestling. When I go into that boxing world, because of that static strength, the clinch is still part of boxing. You can't get away from it.
No.
It helps. So this is why I just believe the future is MMA. Like, even if you never call yourself a mixed martial artist or you never end up fighting, there's a reason you choose this. I always make jokes. There are no gyms out in Toronto now basically anymore that are lasting that aren't MMA gyms. Like, you know, there's all these legendary Muay Thai gyms, but there's a reason they keep adding all these other arts because now it's just hard to sustain. There's a reason because the future is just MMA, even if guys aren't smart enough to put it all together. And so that's kind of what we're doing with Thiccboy. Like, you know, the way we do these pancreation events. Same with Sambo in Russia, right? Sambo's basically MMA. All these guys are killers, not because of, everyone's like the Dagestani wrestling. No, they basically grow up doing MMA. If I'm doing
they just grapple and punch
and kick. What's combat Sambo? If I can do that at 13, what am I basically training? So what happens by the time I'm 18 if I've had 50 of these Sambo matches? My view, and from what I can tell, the kids are the ones who are going to kind of dictate this, right? The future is just going to be a lot of people just doing MMA. It's just like...
So I agree with you just because the time is coming that legitimacy is more important. Like, people know it. Like, if you lie right now in front of me, I might say like, yeah. But I know, like, you know the truth. I don't know how, but everybody knows the truth. So it's just a matter of like, if you tell like a deal breaker is if you tell the truth or if you not. I want to hear from your mouth. The point I'm trying to make is boxing, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, and wrestling. All of these things, I think that's just my thought. They came from two men competing against each other to show that how you are dominant than next
fighting.
guy.
It's all started off as fighting. And that's just why this is why MMA is dominating all these other sports, because they've lost their way. They've all lost their way in chase of money. I love boxing, right? My biggest arguments a lot of times with boxers, and a lot of people think I'm the MMA guy who hates boxing. A lot of my arguments for what's happening in boxing is because I love boxing. We are getting shitty fights. Sorry, but I'm gonna use this as a platform to talk about my issues with it, right?
No, you should.
Canelo Alvarez is fighting this weekend against a guy who he shouldn't be fighting. Boxing has lost its way, and the reason MMA is so popular is because people will bring up, oh well, Canelo's doing this because of Mayweather. Mayweather's breaking records. There's a reason
that man was champion for.
Why did Conor McGregor get so much of an opportunity against him? Because he was an MMA guy, right? You'll never get that opportunity as a boxer. Francis Ngannou got to fight Anthony Joshua, heavyweight world champion, Olympic champion. He got to fight Tyson Fury. He's never won a boxing match. Meanwhile, legit boxers can't get these fights.
No.
Like, Deontay Wilder couldn't get a fight with either one of them.
So to make that point, I was like, at the end of the day, they brought all of these fighting just to prove which man is more dominant than the other one. So what happened, like, okay, I'll say like, oh, I beat in boxing. I beat you in wrestling. I beat you in Jiu-Jitsu. But then in the back of the head, I'm like, oh, I could have kicked him right there. Oh, maybe I could have taken you down.
That was me in wrestling.
Now what happened, MMA, mixed martial arts, they brought everything together. It's like all TV, computer, MacBook, everything in one phone. That's why every single person in this world,
they have old school boxing. Boxing used to just be a fight, right? That's where it started.
This is not a fight no more.
It is. It's still a fight, but
it is, but it's not like as soon as you hold, like you gotta let it go. If you push somebody head down, you gotta let it go.
And this was funny. Boxing started adding these rules because it became too ugly, right? But this is why mixed martial arts became so important, because you would bring actual martial artists from these worlds. So it wasn't a boxer who knew a little bit of wrestling, right? It wasn't a wrestler who knew how to punch. It's kind of now become everything. That's why the old school MMA days were kind of brutal, right? But you can't help but watch. So when I talk about how much money guys make compared to boxing MMA, and people are very critical of the UFC, I don't knock it. But people have to be realistic. In the first 30 years of boxing, what was the average fighter making to be a fighter? A free drink at a bar? Like the sport's been around for 100 years. There's still unsanctioned boxing matches. There's guys who fight 20, 30 times who never make $1 million. You can't make it to 30-0 and be known in the UFC without being a millionaire. It's just, and I troll a lot of my boxing friends and I say, you guys have more respect for MMA than you do your own boxers, because you guys will let MMA guys with 0 wins come into your sport and you right away give them more respect. And this, I know more about boxing than a lot of people who are boxers. I don't care how many times you box. If you don't watch boxing, you don't know shit about boxing. When I hear them say stuff like Shakur Stevenson is boring, this guy is boring, there's no such thing like that in MMA. Khabib was considered boring. But guess what happens to MMA? When you keep winning, Dana White can hate you. But guess what happens when you're winning fights in the UFC? It doesn't matter how boring you are. Like, this is the thing about MMA. Even if you have a boring style, because you're still fighting, and because there's always a risk of a guy kicking your head, choking you, even when you beat a high-level champ in a boring manner, it's respected. To a lot of people's point, when you call certain boxers boring, that's more of an indictment on the sport. This is my thing. I think a lot of times I'm more of a boxing purist than most boxing fans. Like, I hear the stuff that comes out of their mouth, and I'm like, and then you're surprised that Jake Paul is dominating your sport in terms of numbers. You're surprised MMA fighters are making more money than your champs. How many boxing matches Tyron Woodley won?
None.
More money than Shakur Stevens ever made in a fight. How? And he didn't even have to fight a champ. Tyron Woodley fought Jake Paul and made more money than an undefeated Olympic athlete has ever made. Still, like, that's terrible for the sport of boxing. So I keep warning boxing fans as they're saying this, like, all your promotions are failing. HBO Boxing is gone since Floyd left. They were breaking records with Floyd. Showtime Boxing was breaking records with Floyd. They're gone. DAZN just dropped Canelo not too long ago. Tried to bring him back. PBC got dropped by Fox. Like, Canelo and these guys are kind of ruining the sport. And now you have these Saudis coming to save it, right? But the reality is, man, like, if this keeps up, it's just going to be hard to get people to want to pay for these fights. Like, so when I look at a guy, like when I bring up how much money guys like Conor McGregor made already, there's not a single Conor McGregor in boxing in history. No boxer's ever made that much money with 2 losses on his record before 20 fights. These guys don't exist in boxing. You have to win 20, 30 fights in a row, and then even then, you can still be treated like Shakur Stevenson. Once again, there are guys who are fighting 100 amateur fights, pro all this, that won't make $1 million in a weekend. Now you can do it doing jiu-jitsu. So it's like, where is this going to be in 10 years? Where is this going to be? Like, when my kid is 20, the chances are the people who are going to make the most money are the ones who can do them all. That's what ONE FC is. You have all these Muay Thai champs fighting MMA. And so I just think the future of the sports overall is back to what it originated, which was who's the better fighter, man. And that's what I think we're coming back to, right? Is just the purest, man. Like, who can fight? I don't care how you did it. I don't care what your style is. You know what the best base to become a boxer and be successful? Become a UFC fighter first. Because they will pay you way more
And you go
money.
back to boxing and make millions and get out.
You will make more money as a 40-year-old former UFC fighter than you will make being a 20, 30 fight boxing vet like Shakur Stevenson. I can name now multiple UFC fighters who've made 0 wins in boxing who've made more money than Shakur Stevenson. So you want to make money in boxing, get to the UFC first because you'll get paid way more by the time you do that first boxing match.
I agree.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, like, how did you manage to go 6-0? You said professional fighting.
6-0 as a professional. Yeah.
And in amateur, you stayed on
11-0.
How?
Because I started my MMA career in a boxing gym, I got a lot of game in the fight world that MMA guys just didn't have yet. First person ever told me not to lift heavy weights was my boxing coach. I didn't listen at the time, but it was always in the back of the mind, which was fighters don't need to lift. That wasn't always the mentality of a lot of MMA guys. The understanding of brain damage. MMA, let's say, was maybe 10, 15 years old in terms of UFC, but boxing been around forever. So I'm meeting 6-year-old. There was no 6-year-old ex-UFC fighters when I started my career, right? They didn't exist, but there's a lot of 6-year-old boxers. I got to see what that looked like. I just got to see a lot of things in game that boxers understood already. And that was one of the big things for me, was just like knowing, oh, wow, like there's a lot of guys taking a lot of damage who you'll never hear of, and they're just a stepping stone for the guy you did hear of, right? For Floyd to make that $100 million, it was piled on a bunch of dead bodies. And what I mean by dead bodies, not actual, but like a lot of guys with CTE, a lot of guys who never made it, a lot of guys who fought 100 fights and aren't okay now. Like the Muhammad Ali's. Do you know how many Muhammad Ali's there are who didn't get to be a legend? I have people that will argue with me about that, and then I ask them a question, and even your sound guys can ask this. Who did Khabib fight to get his title before Conor? When he got that belt strapped around him. I've told you this
I know
before.
that white guy. What's his name?
See, but and because I've told you.
Oh, wow. I forgot his name, but...
Nobody cares. His name was Ali Quinta. They had
Ali
a 5-round
Quinta, yeah.
fight. He was a
Bro, but the guy gave him a tough
Why?
fight.
Why? Because he's a former wrestler who comes from a
He was
handful of
fourth guy to fight. Like, everybody was pulling out.
He's a wrestler. He came up with Aljamain Sterling, Matt Serra, and Chris Weidman, high-level wrestlers. And then Ray Longo was a boxing coach. Look at all the guys that got as champs. Who's fighting this weekend against O'Malley?
Rob.
Who's his team?
I don't know.
Same team. Wow. Boxing and wrestling. But nobody cared.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching part first of this series with Tyson the Beast. And if you thought it was over, it's not. Stay tuned for the part 2 next week.